On day 9, we will be covering these areas of the country. We'll leave Williamsburg, drive to the Mariners Museum, cross the Chesapeake Bay, and go to Chincoteague Island. Let's get started. Out in front of the Mariners Museum are two rather large Spanish galleon cannons. We'll be following this route through the museum, first seeing the monitor exhibit, and then looking around the rest of the exhibit, including the small craft building. This model of the Trieste has been here a while. It was here in 1968 when my brother stood in front of it on our vacation. First, we'll see the Monitor Center. We'll go see a movie, look at the exhibits of the building, go outside and see the full-scale model, and then look at the conservation area. This was a historic battle that happened between two ironclads, the Virginia or Merrimac and the Monitor from the north. This is a timeline of how it was happening. First, the Merrimac or Virginia was being built by the south. The Merrimac was actually an old ship repurposed and was not new. It was the Virginia that had been a sailing ship and was in Newport Navy Yard when the Confederates approached and was ordered to be burned. It burned to the waterline, but then the Confederates raised it, and as you can see in the top left, they used the bottom part of it to make what we call the Merrimac today. After it was raised, it was encased in Tredegar armor. It had many innovations. A ram up front, bow and stern were actually underwater. It had cannons on each side and pivotal cannon in front. It had sloping casemates so that the cannon shells bounced off of it, and an underwater propeller that was hard to hit. It also has some limitations. Its ram was cracked and broke off easily. It had very weak engines, and its draft was 22 feet because it was made from a sailing vessel. But it was awesome to look at from a sailing vessel as it came toward. This is one of its 9-inch guns, the front of which was blown off by the Cumberland during the battle. The Navy gave Erickson 100 days to build his warship. He said he was only going to need 90 of them. They had to catch up with the South on the Merrimac. This ship was built from the ground up as an ironclad. It had an Erickson's battery which rotated constantly and fired the cannons out of it in various directions. As I said, it was built from the ground up, and most of it was underwater. Only the turret and a small piece of deck were projected above the waterline. As you can see from the full-scale model, there was a box up front for the pilot to see out and to guide. Then the turret that turned constantly. It didn't just turn to point in a particular direction, it just rotated constantly, and they had to figure out where the other ship was sometimes. As you can see from this side, all of the sleeping quarters and everything else was below water. The water line was where the red and black meet. And now let's look at this battle.
March 8th, 1862. At 1:30 p.m., the CSS Virginia and her two escorts steam into Hampton Roads at high tide.
We should take a glass and have a look, sir. I believe that things are coming down at last.
The ships of the Union's North Atlantic Blockading Squadron, including 5 major warships, are taken by surprise. The steamers off Fortress Monroe begin to belch smoke, while the sailing vessels off Newport News Point prepare for the coming action.
The Merrimac is close at hand.
The Virginia is under the command of Flag Officer Franklin Buchanan, one of the most aggressive officers in the Confederacy. Though the Union ships have a combined total of 291 guns to the Virginia's 10, they are wooden vessels. Buchanan is determined to prove what will happen when wood meets iron. As the Virginia comes within range, the Union ships and shore batteries open fire. The Congress unleashes a 26-gun broadside, a blast that would stagger any wooden warship, but not the Virginia.
Full steam ahead! On to the Cumberland!
The Virginia steams past the Congress, blasting her as she goes, severely damaging the frigate. Buchanan wants the Cumberland first. Her rifled guns pose a threat to the Virginia's armor. Buchanan bears down on the sloop, closing to within 1,500 yards. Buchanan's first shot rips through the Cumberland's starboard rail. The second destroys an entire gun crew. Soon the Cumberland's decks are running with gore. Blood flows from her scuppers.
Here she goes!
The Virginia continues her approach, her iron plates pounded by Union guns. Yet she remains shot-proof.
Prepare to repel boarders!
Like some huge, half-submerged crocodile, the Virginia closes in. The Virginia's rifled bow gun blows a hole into the Cumberland's hull. At the same instant, a ram crashes through the Cumberland's starboard side. Water gushes in. The Cumberland begins to sink. But then alarm sweeps through the Virginia. Her ram is stuck. Even with full power in reverse, she cannot pull away.
Reverse engines! Reverse engines!
At last, the Virginia pulls free. Buchanan brings the ironclad broadside to the Cumberland and continues to punish her at point-blank range.
Fire!
The Merrimac was hugely successful, but it took it half a mile to turn around, and so could only make so many passes in a day.
Completes her turn. It is just after 4 p.m. The Virginia, impervious to the guns of the Congress, pulls within 200 yards of the mighty wooden warship and opens fire.
The battle showed the superiority of the ironclad. The Congress had been sunk, the Cumberland sunk, and the Minnesota gravely damaged with almost no damage to the Merrimac.
But the Virginia's pilot cannot navigate in the treacherous channels of Hampton Roads at night, especially at low tide. Under heavy fire, he steams for Sewell's Point to wait for daybreak. But the USS Monitor, under the command of Lieutenant John Worden, is already nearing Hampton Roads. At 9 p.m., she steams into sight. Union sailors realize that their own ironclad has arrived. March 9th, 6 a.m. The Virginia departs Sewell's Point, accompanied by the Patrick Henry, Jamestown, and Teaser. Their target is the Minnesota, but heavy fog delays their approach. Finally, at 8:30, the Virginia closes within range and sends its first shot through the Minnesota's rigging. Now, the Monitor advances.
What is that? That is the Erickson battery.
Gentlemen, that is the Merrimac. You had better go below.
At 8:45 a.m., iron meets iron. For the next 4 hours, the ironclads hammer away at each other at less than 100 yards, testing every inch of their armor. But the Monitor's gunners have problems that are often disoriented inside the continuously turning turret.
The battle between the two Ironsides lasted for a very long time as they looped and turned around each other, tried to ram each other, but missed several times, and did almost no damage to either one of the ships. It finally ended up being a draw, with both ships leaving to make minor repairs and thinking they had defeated the
The
other.
Monitor veers off onto a shoal.
The Monitor has run into the shallows. She's giving up the fight.
Jones reluctantly turns back to Norfolk for repairs. He believes he's leaving the Union ironclad disabled. The Monitor is not disabled. Lieutenant Green confers with his wounded commander.
Gentlemen, I leave it with you. Do what you think is best. Save the Minnesota, if you can.
Lieutenant Green lets the Virginia go and returns to the Minnesota side, obeying his original orders to protect her. On March 9th, 1862, iron met iron at Hampton Roads in a spectacular battle that was fought to a draw. But in the battle between iron and wood, there was a clear victory, and it changed every navy in the world.
The Merrimac was scuttled about 2 months later by Southern forces as the Union forces approached Norfolk Shipyard. The Monitor was being moved to December 31st of that year to a new port when a sudden storm caught them by surprise, and they had to abandon ship to their escort vessel, and slowly it sank underwater. It was rediscovered in 1973. It was found with the turret upside down, and an archaeological rescue mission was launched in order to raise as much of it as possible. The turret was mainly intact, and as you can see, it had the cannon still inside, and so it was raised and brought in to the Monitor Center, where it is being conserved from the salt water it has set in for so long, and both of its cannons also. This is a mock-up of what it looked like when it was raised, and you can see here the cannon hose that were bored 3 holes so it's scalloped on the edges, and how the cannon looked as it was upside down there. Now we come to the age of exploration. The Vikings were using ships like this to explore Iceland, Greenland, and North America. Columbus in 1492 was using ships like the Nina and the Santa Maria to explore the Americas. Chinese junks like this were being used to explore and were 6 times the size of European ships. Henry Hudson was given the Half Moon by the Dutch East Indies Company for exploration, and Captain Cook, when he came to Polynesia, Tahitian Warpaya came out to meet him. The Greek trimarans were 3 rows of oars and were used as battleships and mainly for ramming. Moving on, we come to a Liberty ship, which were built by the dozens during World War II to carry supplies. Thomas Jefferson believed we needed a strong U.S. Navy, and so he started building one, and it came in handy during the Barbary Wars in the early 1800s. And now we move to a new type of warship, used in World War II, the aircraft carrier, which are still powerful weapons today. In the large ship hall, we see various types of cruise ships and freighters and other specialty ships that were used in the 20th century. And then we go to the August Crabtree models. He built models of various famous ships, and they are beautifully and exquisitely detailed. Here we have a Roman merchant ship from 50 AD. Next we come to the Mara, the flagship of William the Conqueror in 1066. Another model of the Pinta, 1492. And also the Santa Maria, in 1492. Next we see a Venetian Galleass, 1650, and a steamer from the 1800s. Now we move out to the International Small Craft Center. This building houses small craft from all over the world with various purposes. The Tijger, or Hawk, was used in the Netherlands as a general workboat. The board stabilized it. The double-hull kayak was used in the ocean in Alaska. Jangada is from Brazil and used as a fishing vessel, not much more than a raft. The weed boat from Portugal was used to collect weeds and seaweed. The dhow from Kenya was used as a general workboat in the lakes. And the Umiak from Alaska was covered with walrus skins and used as a general craft. Our next exhibit will be Abandoned Ship Stories of Survival, how people survive after shipwrecks on the sea. Here we see a boat from a rescue station or lifeguard station. Here's a boat from the Titanic. And here's a man being rescued as he's winched off a ship. Admiral Nelson was one of the most famous of the British officers and died at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. And now we come to the time of whaling ships as they went out to hunt the whale oil that we needed to run our society. Here's a model of one of those and the boats that would be used to row out and harpoon the whales. And now it's time to head on down the road, and there's Newport News Naval Yard and an aircraft carrier. We're headed across the Chesapeake Bay on the bridge and tunnel. We will be crossing the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay on a bridge and a tunnel. It's partly a bridge and two tunnels, and we'll follow this route across. As you can see, the tunnel was laid in sections, and you can see here the bridge and the tunnel sections that go underneath the water. Let's go on and get started. Soon we're approaching the first of the two tunnel sections where we'll dive under the water on one of the artificial islands. As we depart the tunnel, it's raining, and soon we'll be diving under the water again in one of the tunnels. And now we're making it back on dry land at the eastern shore of Virginia. To the right is the Atlantic Ocean, and to the left is the Chesapeake Bay. Soon it's time to drive out through the marshes and swamps to Chincoteague Island. We'll be driving through the town of Chincoteague on our way to the Assateague Island National Seashore. It's mainly a small touristy town, has one major event each year. As we drive out the other end of the island, we cross a swampy marsh area, and then we come to Chincoteague National Wildlife Refuge and Assateague Island National Seashore. At the entry station, we show them our senior pass, and they pass us on through. As you can see here, we have passed through Chincoteague Island, where the big town is, and come to Assateague Island. We passed along the highway, went through town, and ended up in the park. We'll start at the Visitor Center, then move to see the horses, go to the beach, and then back to Snow Goose Pool before leaving for the day. Let's look around the Visitor Center. First, as you can see, there's much wildlife in this area, but what we've come to see are the special ponies that are here and are only found here in a special variety. For one of these ponies, Misty, a book was written about him that later became a bestseller. As we leave the Visitor Center, we see cars parked, and we know what that means. They're looking at some kind of animal. And soon we see it too, our first two ponies that we'll see here on Assateague Island. They are pretty well allowed to roam as they please, but certain sections are fenced off in order to keep the herd separate. And there are more than horses to look at. There are great blue herrings also feeding in the shallows. Moving on along, we come to another visitor center on the coast, Tom's Cove, and there we see some fish and some aquariums. And then it's time to drive along the beach. Out there's the Atlantic Ocean. During the summers, these beaches are highly populated and a favorite tourist attraction for swimming. The land behind the beaches have sea oats and other grasses growing on them to keep the sand dunes stabilized. Now we move over to Snow Goose Pond. This is flooded during the duck migrations for them to stay on. And now mainly what's out there, a lot of snow egrets catching fish. A cormorant is feeding in the shallow waters. And then as we drive out, we notice the pens where the horses are kept during roundup. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. And now we end day 9.